Hey guys! So with Easter Resurrection Sunday coming up, I decided to do a little video on how do we know Jesus existed and did Jesus really claim to be God? So the other day I was online and I saw this comment on this atheist website, so I wanted to share it with you. It said, all reliable evidence points to Jesus Christ being just a myth. There is no reliable evidence that Jesus even existed, and significant evidence that he didn't. So based on that, that's what kind of inspired this whole thing. People who don't believe that Jesus was a real historical person, like a real person in history, they're called mythicists. A mythicist is a person who believes that Jesus is just a myth, like the Tooth Fairy, like Santa Claus, like the Easter Bunny. And these people are not people that are taken very seriously, even in the atheist community, because there is just so much overwhelming evidence that Jesus was a real person, that saying that he wasn't is just so out there that they're not taken very seriously. He was just as real as George Washington. He was just as real as Abraham Lincoln, or just as real as any other person in history, as Julius Caesar, whoever you want to compare him to. But he was real, a real person. Now, people will say he wasn't God, and that's a whole different story. But saying that Jesus wasn't a real person in history is just so far out that if anyone ever says that, you just gotta correct them, because it's a very common misconception. So what is all this evidence that I'm talking about that proves that Jesus was a real person? Well, first of all, just in the New Testament alone, there are 27 documents, ancient documents written by people who actually witnessed these experiences where they talk about Jesus. But let's not include the Bible, the documents in the Bible, because atheists don't believe in the Bible. So mentioning those 27 documents won't be enough evidence for them. However, here are some documents outside of the Bible that talk about Jesus and therefore prove his existence. So the first one was Flavius Josephus. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but he was pretty much a historian. He was a Jewish historian during the first century. And although he didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, when he was writing his history from his perspective, he mentions Jesus on two separate occasions. In the first one, he's talking about Jesus's miracles. He obviously didn't believe in these miracles, but he was writing about what people were saying about these miracles. He also writes about the crucifixion. That was an actual event that was proven. There was many witnesses, and he writes about the rumors of the resurrection. He clearly didn't believe it, but this is what the talk was going on at the time, so he documented it. Another ancient person who wrote about Jesus was Cornelius Tacitus. Cornelius Tacitus was a first century Roman senator, and he wrote a history of the Roman Empire. And in his writings, he was also not a Christian, but he wrote about Jesus being put to death by Pontius Pilatus. All right, so he mentions him, although he's not a believer. Why did he mention him, even though he wasn't a Christian? Because it's what was going on at the time. Another one was Pliny the Younger. Honestly, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing these names right. But Pliny the Younger was a Roman official who wrote hundreds of letters to people in the Roman Empire. And in many of his letters, he wrote about having to deal with the early Christians. Well, these Christians, they were Christians because they believed in Jesus, so he was hearing all these rumors, even though he himself was not a Christian. So that's why he writes about it. And the last one that I have up here is Thallus. He was one of the first Gentile writers to mention Jesus, and he wrote a natural explanation explaining the darkness that covered the land at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. So remember in the Bible when Jesus dies, the land becomes dark. So when he's writing, he explains what he thinks is a natural explanation to what really happened and why the whole thing turned dark. All right, so here are four people that aren't really Christians, weren't believers, who lived during the time, who were historians, and they mention him. They mentioned him not because they believed he was God, they mentioned him because he was a real person at the time. Why aren't there even more sources? Why do you only have four? And I think there's a few more, but why aren't there even more people talking about Jesus at the time? Well, you have to keep in mind that Jesus ministered for only 3 years. His ministry was only for 3 years, and he lived in a very remote corner of the Roman Empire. It's honestly a miracle that we have anything at all that has made it all these years. This is ancient documents that we're talking about. So honestly, that alone is a miracle in and of itself. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Was Jesus a real person? The answer is yes. You can say he wasn't God, that's fine. You can choose to believe that, but saying he wasn't a real person, you're just outnumbered with all the overwhelming evidence out there. He was a real person. Mic drop. Bye.